Greetings, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. I shall now debate whether Israel has the right to exist. So, I'm going to start off being the proposition, of course, that that is traditional. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the House, this House believes that Israel has the right to exist for many reasons. The modern state of Israel was founded by the United Nations, the only sovereign state in the world ever to have been created by the United Nations, and therefore has greater moral and political legitimacy than any other nation state. And if Israel's right to exist is in doubt, then no other state is entitled to exist. Besides that, obviously Israel traces itself back through heredity, through culture, and through history and so on, to ancient Israel, which existed in that same area for many centuries in ancient times. In the Balfour Declaration, the British government said that they view with favour the establishment of Israel, even though they didn't actually use the word Israel. And the British government at that time represented the whole of the British Empire. So when London said that, they were speaking for Canada, Australia, India, and many other countries back then. Yes, it was a democratic era, but we have to judge things by the standards of the time, by the way things were done way back in 1917. So Israel was established in 1948 to be a safe haven for the Jewish people who'd come quite close to being wiped out just before that, because Jewish people could never be sure of their situation in any other country. Until the 1930s, there was that German Jewish community which had lived there for centuries, had been largely unmolested in the few decades before the Nazis came to office. So if Jewish people couldn't feel secure in Germany, they couldn't feel secure anywhere. You hear these anti-Zionists say, oh, why don't Israelis move to the United States and so on? Well, Jewish people are in a decent situation in the United States right now, though there is anti-Semitism, but there's no telling what could happen in the future. These things can change very rapidly, and there could be an outbreak of massacres there. I think it's unlikely, but we just can't be certain. The only thing that Jewish people can be sure of is if they are in Israel, masters of their own destiny, they will not be annihilated. So it also provides a cultural space for the Jewish people to live their identity to the fullest. They've got the Hebrew language going again, and that's not the case in any other country in the world. And people who wish to practice the Judaic faith can do so in a country where the laws are framed to suit them. Okay, other ethnicities, other religions, people with other languages, they have homelands where the legislation suits their culture, so it's only fair that Jewish people ought to have a very small area of land where they can have things their own way. So it's about the right to self-determination, right? From the Treaty of Versailles, that's been accepted the world over, and the Jewish people are a distinct people by any definition, and they have decided to establish a homeland for Jewish people. It's a right that they don't seek to deny to others. We can look back to 1948 when Israel accepted this UN plan for the establishment of Israel and indeed Palestine. It showed goodwill and reasonableness on the part of the Israelis, willingness to make painful sacrifices to compromise because they were determined to live in peace with their Ishmaelite neighbours. Unfortunately, this goodwill was not reciprocated. So that this unrequited Israeli desire for peace has been the tragedy of the last 70-odd years. Israel is also good to its Muslim minority citizens. Although Israel is the Jewish state, Muslim people have parity in Israel, as do Christians or other minorities, like Druze people, when religious minorities are viciously persecuted by most of Israel's enemies in the neighboring region. So Israel's record on human rights is admirable. No, it's not perfect, but one must, of course, take into account the existential threat that Israel faces on a daily basis. Of course, the rules have sometimes to be bent when the situation is exigent. Now, in extremis, everybody would bend the rules occasionally. You see how there's equality for women, and women's advancement in Israel is far beyond anywhere else in the Middle East. I don't need to even say that it's democracy. There are free and fair elections on a very regular basis. There's a free media, which would put any Arab country to shame. And of course, a free media really is the canary in the coal mine for liberty in general. For saying things which are quite uncontroversial, people can be slung into a fetid dungeon in many of the anti-Zionist countries that ring Israel. So Israel, when obliged to fight, strives to do so in an ethical manner, to keep civilian casualties down, to warn people that buildings are going to be bombed and things like that. And Israel's foes never do likewise. In fact, they deliberately target civilians. So Judea and Samaria are not occupied, the so-called occupied territories. When Israel was repeatedly subjected to unprovoked attacks, she was obliged to counterattack, and it's a legal principle that the victim nation can then claim the land through which she was attacked so that she can't be attacked via that territory in future. Look at Germany after the Second World War having to cede some of her eastern land to Poland and the Soviet Union and so forth. So for countless reasons, Israel absolutely has the right to exist and is recognized as a legitimate country by nations all over the world. So Israel really is a beacon of freedom and humanitarianism, and Arab countries would do well to emulate her marvelous example. I rest my case. So now, I'm going to be the opposition. Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the House, Palestine has a right to exist, secure in her own borders. Israel does not. There is no Israel. It is the Zionist entity. It's a misuse of this biblical name. Remember that major city that the Israelis have the temerity to call their capital is actually Al-Quds al-Arabi. Sometimes people speaking English call it Jerusalem, but it is a misnomer. It is sacred to Muslims as well as Christians. We don't oppose the Jewish religion. Of course, Jewish people should be allowed to practice their faith. Nobody should be discriminated against for their religion or ethnicity, and that includes Jewish people. So Palestine is most certainly a distinct nation, and the Palestinians wish to be Palestinian. Often I hear Zionists say, oh, there are no Palestinians. Well, it's true that the Palestinians are mostly Sunni Muslims, a few are Christians, and they speak Arabic, so they have a lot in common with kindred Arab nations, such as the Egyptians or the Jordanians, but they are still Palestinian. It's like saying because the Americans speak English, they're not actually American, they're English, or something daft like that. Or because most Americans are Christians, they're actually Canadian or Mexican. It is the height of absurdity. So if Palestinians wished to be part of Egypt and or Jordan, that would be up to them, but they don't, so let them be independent. So it's true that Palestine emerged as a distinctive national identity not very long ago, but the same was true of Israel. Remember, until Theodor Herzl came along, virtually nobody talked about establishing a Jewish homeland, and nobody said that his or her nationality was Israeli. You can think of these scores of nation-states which have been created in the last few centuries, some of them as recently as the 1960s, or 2011, South Sudan created. So new nations are born all the time. A nation's got to start somewhere, and Palestine started a respectably long time ago. So it's true that the Palestinian leadership, the Arab High Committee, they spurned this dreadful UN resolution in 1948 to establish Israel. Who on earth would give away 2/3 of his historic homeland to these interlopers, to illegal immigrants? And it's a bitter irony that many right-wingers in the United States in particular who fulminate against refugees or illegal immigrants are so pro-illegal immigration if it's into Israel, or more accurately, into Palestine. The Palestinians had 2/3 of the population in 1948, yet were given only 1/3 of the land, and the less valuable land as well. So, of course, the Palestinians rejected it. It was an insult to them. Remember, the UN was run by imperialist powers at the time. Arabs had almost no representation there. Muslims had almost no representation. And some of these European countries, they felt very guilty for having acquiesced or even actively assisted the Holocaust. So that's why they took it out on the Palestinians. As the late Dr. Edward Said said, the Palestinians are the victims of the victims. If the Israelis were to be given any land, then Jewish people ought to have been given land from Germany, who ought to have compensated them for their wrongdoing. So, yes, it's true that, Palestinians, some of them are also Jordanian citizens, for instance, but many Israelis are also American citizens or Russian citizens. This is daft. Dual nationality exists. Identity and nationality is a complicated issue. So Palestine is under illegal military occupation, not just the West Bank and not just the Gaza Strip, by these dozens of illegal settlements, and Israel's in breach of scores of United Nations General Assembly resolutions. There's a list as long as your arm of the crimes that have been committed about Israelis who booted out Palestinians. Ethnic cleansing has been going on and is utterly reprehensible. So the notion that Israel's got a sparkling human rights record really is a sick joke. The Balfour Declaration, likewise, is a nullity. What right did the British have to give away somebody else's land? Put it this way. Supposing the Palestinians at that time had said, actually, we're going to give some of the UK to the Chinese, would the British have accepted that? Of course not. The very idea is utterly preposterous. And the Balfour Declaration doesn't even mention the word Israel. It just simply says His Majesty's government would view with favour the establishment of a national home for Jewish people. The idea is to be a colony of the British Empire. And it going on to say, without prejudice to the rights of existing communities, even the British said they weren't going to mistreat or supplant the Palestinians, but unfortunately that wasn't adhered to. So they did not say independence for Israel in the Balfour Declaration. So the UN vote was before national self-determination was widely established, and national self-determination is not in the Treaty of Versailles, which the United States didn't even ratify, and only America accepted the notion of national self-determination in 1918. The European colonial masters did not. So the establishment of the Zionist entity is al-Naqba, the disaster for Palestine. Yes, it has had catastrophic consequences. The Gaza Strip is the largest open-air prison in the world, and the Zionist policy is to keep the people just above the grave, an inch from starvation, to cut off medicine, water, electricity from them, to make life unbearable so that they self-deport. And it's been semi-successful in that. There are myriad atrocities which have been carried out by the Israeli Defense Force, and again, it's an absolute lie that they have the nerve to call themselves a defense force, such as the Deir Yassin massacre. So Palestinian people were driven out, they fled in fear of their lives, and Israeli Arabs face severe discrimination. Racism pervades the society, and a country based on faith is necessarily discriminatory. Now, it's true that in the Arab world there are also discriminatory countries, but this is a tu quoque argument. I would like to see reform in the Arab and Muslim world, as well as in Israel, as well as the Israelis either accept that they're going to be a minority in a Palestinian state, or else go abroad to where their ancestors came from. Anyway, most Jewish people are not descendants of the ancient Israelites. They're Khazars. They're people from around the Caspian Sea. It's called Khazar Deniz, like in the Azerbaijani language, who converted to Judaism in the Middle Ages. So there is no hereditary or ethnic link to the ancient Israeli people. Why is it most Israelis are so pallid, whereas people who are really from that region would be fairly swarthy? So the actions of Shariat states which discriminate against religious minorities, that's not the fault of the Palestinians, who treat their own Christian minority admirably. And as for Hamas, you might talk about the dreadful misdeeds of Hamas, which was actively promoted by the Zionists, as their politicians have said themselves. So, yes, Palestine has the right to exist. She has the right to defend herself. Now, a baby would not attack a boxer. Why is it that Palestine, which has only got small arms, would attack a nuclear power? They're only fighting out of absolute desperation. They're only fighting for self-determination. And think of their casualty figures. You know, the civilian casualty figures, it's 100 to 1. 100 Palestinian civilians killed for every Israeli civilian killed. Now, civilians should never be killed. People should strive to avoid that. Unfortunately, collateral damage does occur. I would like nobody to kill full stop. I would like there to be a peaceful solution, but is there? I mean, boycott, divestment and sanctions and so on. This could bring about justice without physically harming anyone. And that, of course, would be welcome. So for all the reasons that I've adumbrated heretofore, Palestine has an unquestionable right to exist, but the Zionist entity does not. I beg to oppose.